Happy New Year. Happy New Year. It's 2025. Happy New Year. So because it's a Happy New Year, I just wanted to give a little excerpt, one from my cards and one from a very famous woman called Joyce Meyer, because it's Happy New Year. This video is not about the New Year, but it just felt like something that needed to be addressed. So this woman, Joyce Meyer, very famous speaker, and she said something that I really like. She said, essentially in a nutshell, that we were created to need new beginnings. To need new beginnings. Places where we can release our faith and say, this is a place of new beginnings for me. A place to have a fresh start. The dawn of a new year is always a good time for a fresh start. You can experience the abundant life that Jesus has set out for you, but it requires making a decision to let go of the past. Unless you refuse to go on the way you have been, no change will come. God wants to change things for you, but they're waiting for our full cooperation. Our total cooperation. Seldom do our circumstances change without something first changing in us. So if you want to experience the new thing this year, release your faith right now and say, this is a place of new beginnings for me, and then watch the results. Does this not sound like what I've been teaching on for forever? If you want the new thing, you have to let go of the old thing. And this is something that a very famous speaker has said in a very beautiful spiritual way. So go ahead and just say that right now for yourself. This is a place of new beginnings for me. Good job. Good job. Welcome to the new year and your new beginning and all of the beautiful things that you want and deserve. Of course, I pulled a New Year card. The Andean cross came up. This is from Alberto Villoldo's shaman deck. And I haven't pulled this card in a long time, but I'm super glad it came up. You can claim it if you want to, not if you don't want to. But this card, I pulled an overall card for the new year, and that's what I got, the Andean cross. Now, the Andean cross, it essentially just encompasses the full cosmology of the shaman, of the spiritualist, of the healer, of the person working in these realms, because it represents all the directions, the upper world, middle world, and lower world. And this hole in the middle is basically like the time travel slot. This is where we move through to get to interdimensional spaces, or all of those different frequencies that we're trying to reach. So the Andean cross encompasses the allness of the all, the fullness of the full, how we get to and travel through all of the different astral realms. And Alberto says that this announces the start to a great journey, that this card represents the beginning of a great journey. So it's time to raise our eyes above the mundane that we seem to be stuck in now, and reach for the things that have in the past seemed just beyond our grasp. This is where we allow new wisdoms to guide us, and we stop trying to make sense of it all before we respond with a yes. This is where we get to say yes to the universe, yes to God, yes to our new beginning, without having to logically understand it first. We just get to have our new beginning. So that's a beautiful card. Claim it if you want it. I'm claiming it. I'm claiming my new beginning. But what I'm actually here to talk about today is my spiritual attack last night. I was fighting in my sleep, and I'll tell you all about it. Okay, so my hand's itching. Somebody must be giving me money. Last night, I dreamed. It was like an astral projection, and I'll tell you why it was an astral projection. I dreamed that I was at my sister's house, and she lives further north in a different state, And I was there. I hadn't been there with her in a long time, and she decided that she was going to order pizza. And I was kind of like about that, because I love pizza, but like for some reason in my astral projection or my dream, I didn't want pizza. I wanted something different. But she got pizza, and I was okay with that. And her husband was there, and he was talking about shoes and boots. I don't know why with him it's always about feet. Not in real life, but in my dreams, when I dream about him, it's like about socks or shoes or something strange. I haven't figured that one out yet. So if any of you know, just drop a comment, let me know. But he was talking about boots and shoes, and she was ordering a pizza. And, then standing in the kitchen there, I kind of sort of all of a sudden realized that I was seeing through my father's eyes as if I were him. And this is how I know that this was an astral projection, because my parents just went to go see my sister yesterday. So they were at her house yesterday. So because of this knowledge, I must have traveled in my sleep like I so often do. And I was with all of them up there. But then all of a sudden, this feeling of tiredness, this overwhelming tired, that place where you're just about to fall asleep and you can't do anything else, but it feels so good to be that tired, like you can just let go and float on. That's how it felt. Like this overwhelming tired came over me, and I felt myself sinking back into the kitchen of her house. And all of a sudden, I had the conscious awareness that I was in my bed at home, but also in her kitchen there. And there was something on me. I felt it attach on my right arm, and I felt it attach here in my trunk. And I was being drug across the bed in my home. It was happening in her kitchen, but I was in my bed being drug across the bed. And I was trying to yell, and I couldn't. I was paralyzed. I couldn't yell. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move the right side of my body where it was attached in and dragging. But I managed to move my left arm, and I was smacking my husband like in the face and the head. I was like, ugh. I didn't have much like control over my left arm. I wasn't purposely hitting him in the face. But I didn't have much control over my left arm, but I was managing to smack him, trying to get his attention so that he could wake up and help me. And I like felt him move away and keep sleeping. And I was like, okay, so I'm in this by myself. And I was trying to fight this thing. And by fighting these things, I mean that I was trying to raise my vibration, trying to shine my light, trying to loosen its grasp, but I was so tired because I had that tired feeling come over me that I was struggling to do that. And I don't struggle very often, so with this sort of thing. So I definitely had the feeling that this was something strong, or that there was a lot. So I kind of moved my consciousness, since I was struggling with this, to the in-between place, in between my sister's house and my house. I swear, if I can make this into a movie to show you guys everything, I would, because it's a 3D freaking spiritual battle that's happening. And as I move my consciousness between these two spaces, I realize that what's actually on me is a bunch of little things, but I sense this big thing coming up behind me like a smoke coming around. And I was like, crap, I've got to do something about this now. So of course we're calling in angels. I've got the angel frequencies coming in. They're starting their battle. And as they start their battle, my consciousness pulls back a little bit. And spiritual workers will really understand this, because there comes a time when you have so much energy invested in these realms that you have to ground yourself, or you become completely drained and out of sorts. So if I'm going to keep assisting in this battle, I have to take a step back. So the angels were fighting, and I took a step back, and I was, thinking about other things, or went somewhere else in my mind to relax and ground in. And I called in. It was taking the angels a long time. So I was like, well, I'm going to call in the spirit of Jesus right now, because this is a very strong frequency. I know that this frequency can take care of this in an instant, in a heartbeat. So I called in the frequency of Jesus and I felt him come in. And you know what he said to me? He said, "This is not what I'm for. This is not what I'm for." And he didn't leave, but he didn't help. And I didn't understand it at the time, but when he said that, I understood that he was a pure love frequency and that he was wanting me to use that frequency within myself to do what needed to be done. So I did. I called on that fourth dimensional Christ consciousness love frequency that he is and represents within myself, and I let it get big and bright, and it was just shining. And between this light and me and the angels, we ended up eventually getting these things to cross over to the other side, the big thing and the small things. And as soon as it was done, I just came to in my bed and I just laid there for a minute because my chest was really hurting. It was a big love battle. I expended a lot of that love energy in my chest. Felt like there was this teardrop shaped hole in it of hollowness, and it needed to refill. So it was hurting, and I was just laying there, and then I heard my husband's breathing change. So I knew he was awake now, of course. And I was like, "Hey, I just got attacked." And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, babe, you're safe. I was like, "No, I mean it. There was a demon on me." And he was like, "Oh, me too." And he, in his sleep, had also been battling something. So it was almost like just vicariously, because we were so close together, he just came with me or was in this battle with me. So it took me a couple hours to fall asleep, because then at this point, I'm awake, I'm connected, my frequency's raised, and now I'm laying in my house, and I'm making sure that my house is clear, which it is, but I realized that there were things everywhere. It was 1:30 a.m. I don't know what was going on yesterday, but there was so much activity, so much movement. There were, this one thing flew up into my face and went, "Ah," and then kept going. And I'm sitting here just watching these things under my bed and around the house, and, I'm pushing them out with light. And I stopped and I was thinking about this, because people have always told me, well, you can put up your bubble of light around your house and things can't get in. And I do that. But what that does is it keeps the dark things from coming in. These other things running through aren't necessarily dark. They're neutral things. And the reality is, even the one that went, "Wah," at me, if I were a spirit, I'd do that to people too, because it looks fun to do. If you are disembodied, then you are not playing by the rules of humanity, which means I can just walk through anyone's house and be like, "Rah." You know what I mean? And it would be totally fun. And they might see me, they might not. If they have the gift, they'll see me. Hopefully they'll just think I'm real cute, like a little kitty cat. But it might scare them because I'm disembodied. You know what I mean? But that doesn't mean that I'm bad or evil or have a low vibration, which means that their light won't scare me away. In fact, I might be attracted to that light. So there just comes a time when you have such a gift of sight and seeing all of these things around you that you realize you're sharing the planet. I share the planet. My house is not just my house. When things come through, when dark things come through, I put out that light to keep them within outside of a boundary. When other things come through, I'm like, "Hey, can you please leave? This is my house. I'd like my space." But there's a lot of traffic that comes through, and they're all different frequencies on all different dimensional planes. So there's not any one frequency that I can put out there that just makes my house go quiet. Sometimes it feels more quiet, depending on what the planets are doing, my level of connection, because if I'm just real grounded and letting myself be disconnected for a little bit, then I'm a little bit more quiet in my house. But last night was not one of those nights. It was a loud night. It was a very congested kind of night. So I did eventually fall back asleep. But I woke up with that question in my mind. If that's not what Jesus is for, what is his role in spiritual warfare? We know that he's a healer and that pure love heals. So his energy gets brought in all the time during my healing sessions. But in spiritual warfare, what is his role? And I sat with that for a little bit this morning, and I realized that he has consistently taught a few different things, and none of them actually have to do with war. So we know that throughout the teachings in the Bible that he cast out demons and he brought people from the dead and did all kinds of things. But the big thing he taught consistently was love and peace. He even opposed military revolt. In his particular time, historically speaking, he taught that the Jews should not rebel against Rome. He encouraged them not to rebel against Roman rule. And on the Sermon on the Mount, he said, whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with him. So he's saying, follow the things that light you up, but don't rebel against the things that are in charge, the things that are already there. We don't encourage war. So he really just taught love and peace, to do good to those who hate you, to bless those who curse you, to pray for those who hurt you, and forgive those who kill you. This is what he taught consistently. So his role in spiritual warfare is basically through his healings and deliverance, and that is how he battled against darkness. He did not ever directly go in and straight fight things. His whole life was essentially a battle against the powers of darkness, but how he handled it was through healings and deliverances. So his final act as a human on this earth, if we believe he was a human, and if not, then symbolically his final act of dying was to end the war, to deliver us by ending the war between us and God. The veil ripped, it was torn. There was a war between us and God. And if you apply that to the teachings that you already have through me, there's a war between our human and our spiritual selves. There always has been. But that ended with love, with the love frequency that he is. So essentially, we're learning 2 things today when it comes to spiritual warfare. Number 1, love, not war. Love, not war. That's what he taught. And in love, not war, we get to embody love in order to fight our wars. So I was originally taught that when dark things come to you, you take on swords of light and you chop their heads off and you tear them apart and you turn them into ash. But energy can't be created nor destroyed. So essentially what you're doing is just a bit of alchemy and then sending them to the other side. But with our first rule of love, not war, we're learning that we don't have to fight so hard in order to get these things away. That what we do instead is heal and deliver ourselves. So these things are attracted to us most of the time for a reason. In my particular instance, last night, it was just because something dark was there, I happened to show up and it was like, ooh, let me get some of this. In retrospect, it was draining my energy. It was feeding on my power and my high frequencies. That tired feeling like that I experienced, that was when it first started draining, but it felt good to be that tired. So I was like, okay, maybe I can rest. And then it was like, anyways. But these things are naturally attracted to low vibrations, to vibrations that match them. So if we have those wounds, if we have rejection wounds or low self-worth wounds or abuse wounds, any wounds like that we have, those things are attracted to them and they want to connect there and feed on those things. So the best thing we can do when we're under attack is to bring ourselves into a space of love and peace inside, and then none of those low vibrations are coming from our bodies for them to attach to. So this is doing our healing work on a regular basis. This is understanding that we are not at war with ourselves anymore. We are not at war with God anymore. We can have peace, we can have love, we can rest. There's nothing really to fight. We love and accept all of ourselves, who we are, the things that we've been through, and we are not in victim mode anymore. We are at love and peace with where we are, fully content with our lives and where we're going in the future. So, love, not war. We don't have to fight so hard against these things. We can simply be love on the inside, bring ourselves into that frequency. Rule number 2, don't be a wussy. Just because we're loving and not fighting doesn't mean we're wussing. Okay, we're not wussing. Don't be a wussy is rule number 2. Now, if you notice, during the spiritual attack last night, Jesus did not leave, but he didn't help. And what I ended up doing was embodying his frequency in myself and shining that light out. And eventually, that was what helped everything go across the veil to the other side and release from the space. So I was pushing that through myself. What Jesus was teaching us is, yeah, I can fight your battles for you. I'm real good at that. I'm real good at sending love out and scaring things off. Or I can teach you how to deliver yourself. I can teach you how to embody me, because we are one. And once you learn how to do that, you'll become empowered and you can do anything in the world that you want to do. That empowerment is what was being taught. He taught me how to fight my own battle through the Holy Spirit, the spirit of love that's inside of me, and learn my power. So, in this message, essentially, in spiritual warfare, love, not war, and don't be a wussy. That's it. That's it. That's the whole message. But what I really would like to do, since we're like sharing ghost stories and whatnot, is I want to read you an Edgar Allan Poe story, because Edgar Allan Poe and I were like lovers in a past life. I'm sure of it. And I feel like he has really scary stories to tell. So I'll meet you right back here. Hold on. Welcome to the Masque of the Red Death. Story time. Also, as a side note, I just want you to know that even though I look and sound really creepy right now, I smell like joy, okay? I can't pronounce this, so I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it smells like Palo Santo, sage, cedar. It literally makes me smell like joy, so. Okay, back to being creepy. The Masque of the Red Death. Also, I forgot my Edgar Allan Poe book, in the storage building with all the other books, because I have too many to keep in my house. So I'm pretending that this is the Masque of the Red Death. By Edgar Allan Poe, the Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban, which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade, but first, let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that protected his rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western, or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound. And thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brow as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live, and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. but to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7. There are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirringly on until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quitted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thoughtful amongst those who reveled. And thus too it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company indeed seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt and shrouded from head to foot, and the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have endured, if not approved by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon his spectral image, which with the slow and slalom movement, as if more fully to sustain its roll, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know him. Him whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern, or the blue chamber, in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room, where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe, with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party. There were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way, uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddened with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleamingly upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. Think about this story for a while, and how ignoring the shadow, ignoring the darkness, not becoming the light, but shutting it out, shutting yourself in, always inevitably leads what's without to within. So through all of this that we've talked about today, that Spirit of Jesus is still here and really wants to channel a New Year's blessing to all of you. A blessing of love, a blessing of harmony in the home, a blessing of warm hearths, abundance in your bellies. There's just a big blessing that's wanting to come through. So if you are capable, leave yourself open and receptive, and shut your eyes, breathe deep, relax all of your muscles, because this is how we become receptive, able to receive, and just feel what's coming through here. May tongues of fire be on each of your heads as your wings grow big, and your tongues are made of gold, receiving this blessing for peace and unity as everything flows right now in your DNA in this figure 8 infinity shape, because that's what I see happening to your DNA, your energetic DNA right now.